Welcome to Life in Real Time with Lucia, the podcast where we capture the essence of raw, unfiltered conversations and where we will dive deep into the journey of life. No topic is off limits here, and things can get real, really real. This is your space for open, honest, and sometimes messy discussions about everything that life throws our way. The good, the bad, and the downright chaotic. Some episodes will be unscripted, where anything can happen, and others will be carefully crafted to explore thought-provoking themes. A fair warning, though, that this is rated adult, and yes, that means that the language might get a little colorful at times, but hey, that's life in real time, right? So grab your favorite drink, settle in, and join me on this unpredictable adventure through life's ups and downs, and everything in between. Let's keep it raw, keep it real, and above all, let's keep it honest. I'm Lucia, and this is Life in Real Time. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me again today. Today, we are going to be talking about when love feels unequal. But before we begin, I want to remind you that this episode is for reflection, awareness, and personal understanding. It is not medical, psychological, or therapeutic advice. I will be talking about family dynamics and emotional patterns that are often discussed in psychology in general terms. If anything in this episode brings up something difficult for you, please take care of yourself and reach out to someone you trust or a qualified professional if needed. Welcome back, everyone. Today, I want to talk about something that is very sensitive, but also very common. Today, we'll be talking about favoritism. Not just the obvious favoritism, but that subtle kind. The kind you feel more than you can explain, where you'll experience that difference in tone, the difference in patience, the difference in understanding, or the difference in how people are treated within the same family. And I think it is important to talk about. And I'm not here to blame anyone. This is not about blame. But because it shapes how people see themselves for years, I think it's important that we talk about it. In psychology and family systems theory, it's often understood that children don't just grow up based on what is said to them. They grow up based on how they are emotionally experienced in the system they are raised in. And sometimes those emotional patterns stay with us long after childhood ends. Now, most families don't intentionally set out to treat their children differently. And obviously, many parents would never consciously think, well, I love this child more. That's not what I'm saying. But in psychology, it's widely understood that favoritism is often happening unconsciously. It can be influenced by personality differences, emotional compatibility, stress, unresolved patterns from the adult's own upbringing, or even what feels easier in the moment. So, you may have the one child who might be easier to understand emotionally and will receive more patience. You might have the other child who might be more sensitive, more questioning, or more independent, and they'll be expected to cope more on their own. But none of this is usually intentional. But the other side of this is that children don't experience intention. They experience feeling. And what that feeling often becomes, or when it becomes internalized, it becomes their identity. And they may even start thinking to themselves, I'm harder to understand, or I have to be the strong one. I'm less easy to love, or I need to prove myself. And I say this not just from observation. There can be labels that form. and sometimes spoken and sometimes unspoken. You can have the good girl, the good boy. You can have the rebellious one. You can have the difficult one. You can have the easy one. There's so many labels that you may start thinking. And once those roles are formed, they can quietly shape how you are treated and how you see yourself, even when you outgrow them later in life. From a psychological perspective, not mine, because I am not a psychologist at all, by far, just in doing some research. So from a psychological perspective, especially in attachment theory, children develop their sense of self through emotional responsiveness. What does this mean? Well, how consistently they feel seen, heard, and emotionally understood. When that experience is uneven, children will rarely think, well, my parent is limited, emotionally overwhelmed. No, they won't think that. What they're going to think is, there must be something wrong with me. And over time, that belief becomes an internal wiring, not as a conscious thought, but as an emotional baseline. How does this show up later in life? Well, they become people pleasers. They feel the need to over-explain themselves. They have difficulty trusting their own perception. Or they're just constantly trying to be good enough. And I think many people don't realize how deeply these patterns can stay in the body and the nervous system. They don't just disappear with age. They just evolve. And one of the hardest parts of favoritism is that it's often not openly discussed. So the person experiencing it is left in a confusion, like this confusing emotional space, because nothing is directly wrong, but something feels uneven. And that creates the internal questioning. Am I imagining this? Am I too sensitive? Or why does it feel like this? And over time, this kind of emotional experience can lead to something psychologists often refer to as self-doubt of emotional reality. This is where a person starts questioning their own perception of what they're feeling. Not because it isn't real, but because it was never validated or reflected back to them. And this is where awareness becomes important, because once you start to see the pattern, you stop internalizing it as your identity. You begin to understand. Well, this was something I experienced, but it is not who I am. What's really important to understand is that family roles don't stay in childhood. They often repeat in adult relationships until they are consciously recognized. So someone who grew up feeling less seen might become someone who overgives in relationships, will struggle with boundaries, seeks validation from others, or feels they need to earn love. And once again, I will repeat, not because something is wrong with them, but because their nervous system adapted to that environment early on. And someone who grew up in a different role might carry different patterns as well. And I think that the key point here is this. We don't choose these patterns consciously when we are children. We adapt to survive emotionally. And I think that's something I personally came to understand more deeply over time too. That a lot of what I thought was just who I am was actually shaped by roles I was placed in or stepped into within the family system. And separating those two things, who you are versus what you adapted to, let me tell you, it can be incredibly freeing. There is also a quieter layer to this that people don't always talk about, and that is the grief part of it. Not just grief over what happened, but grief over what did not happen. The emotional balance that wasn't there, the understanding that wasn't always felt, the sense of being fully seen in the same way as others. And in psychology, this is important because unresolved emotional experiences, they don't disappear. They often just resurface in relationships, especially when something similar is triggered. So sometimes we are not reacting to the present moment. We are just reacting to an old emotional memory that has been activated. And awareness of that changes everything because it removes the shame. It replaces what's wrong with me with where did this come from? So if you've ever felt like love in your family wasn't always evenly expressed, or you've carried the feeling of being less seen, less understood, or placed into a role that didn't fully reflect who you are, I want you to know this. Your emotional experience is valid, and understanding it is not about blaming anyone. It's about understanding yourself more deeply, because awareness gives you the space that you need. The space to respond differently, the space to heal differently, the space to see yourself outside of these old roles. You are not defined by the role that you were placed in. You are defined by who you are when you step outside of it. I want to thank you for being here with me on Life in Real Time with Lucia. Just remember, friends, that your awareness matters, your healing matters, and your story is still unfolding. Thank you so much for listening.